Before we get started with our final power panel that I'm calling them all today because these panels have been so great, I want to introduce Subha Barry. She is co-chair of the Gloria Steinem Endowed Chair Steering Committee at the Institute for Women's Leadership, and she is the managing director and senior vice president of Working Mother Media. Subha?
Well, good afternoon, and it's been just a phenomenal day, and I was telling one of our colleagues here that I wish I could start every day off with a little dose of this. Then I know I'd be ready to face the world and take the battles on. As a member of the Gloria Steinem Endowed Chair Steering Committee, I am so privileged to work with a group of just incredible, amazing women leaders. Many of them were here this morning. I know some of them are still here. But together, we've worked for the last 3 years to raise $3 million to endow the Gloria Steinem Endowed Chair. And what's unique about this chair is, as you know, it's sort of at the intersection and nexus of media, culture, and feminist studies at Rutgers University. And so on behalf of our committee and my co-chair, Jerry Laybourne, who could not be here with us today, but I know she is here in spirit, I am delighted to share the progress we've made up to date. So when I first learned about the plans to establish this first ever chair named for Gloria, I was so thrilled, and I was delighted when Alison Bernstein invited me to be a part of this group. And then to be a co-chair with Jerry was just icing on the cake. Most of my career has been spent in finance, so I'm not exactly as familiar with the media part of things. Even though I lead Working Mother Media now, I spent the bulk of my career in finance. And the women were few and far between. For many of you who know financial services firms, they're not exactly known for being just the most hospitable places for women, and especially women of color. But that was in the 80s and 90s. So in some ways, we women in financial services thought of ourselves as pioneers. I know Candy is here, Candy Strait, who's on our committee, and she's with the financial services industry also. And we did think of ourselves as pioneers, but in a slightly different way. And so we did our part in pushing a very male-dominated culture to become more inclusive. And yes, sometimes it came from lawsuits, but it didn't matter how we did it. But ultimately, we got them to open up, and they are on the forefront now of actually looking at finding ways to become more inclusive for women and people of color. I'd admired Gloria all my life, and I had the great privilege of, through Wilma Mankiller, who is Gloria's very dear friend and who is my mentor, of being introduced to her. And so this is sort of a double honor to be able to help raise funds for this amazing naming opportunity. And I see that there is so much work to be done. I work in the corporate sector, and as I look around, when you still have only 5%, less than 5% women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, you know that there is an enormous amount of work still to be done. And media plays a big, big role in the images we see and what people hear about what can be and cannot be done. Today's program is an example of the vision we had for the Gloria Steinem Endowed Chair, to create new conversations, new debates, as Devaki said, and raise important questions, challenge the status quo, bring together media leaders, academic scholars, and get them really talking about what can be done to change what is not acceptable. Not acceptable. We will not stand for it anymore. My very special thanks to all of you for being a part of today's event. It could not have been as successful without each of you here playing a role. And as I said to somebody that was on one of the panels, I loved hearing the voices. And by that, I don't mean the timbre of the voice, but just what that voice meant and stood for. And so the really good news is that we are almost at our most ambitious goal of $3 million. And unlike other endowed chairs where you have just one person that writes the check and names the chair, this was a collective effort. And so we've had 350 donors, 10 incredible foundations that have given us $2.6 million to date. So this is sort of a grassroots, broad, wide, amazing effort to come together. This January, an anonymous donor approached Jerry Laybourne and myself with a magnificent, amazing challenge. At that time, we had raised about, we had about $650,000 left to raise out of the $3 million. And the generous donor pledged that if we got it to $2,750,000, they would give us the other $250,000 to take us over the top. So we have that in the bag, but it has to be done by May 31st. So there is a deadline to it. So we've raised $250,000 of that amount. So we have what is left is about $150,000 that's left to raise, and the additional $250,000 will take us over the top. And we have a few things up our sleeve. So on the back of today's program, you'll see a link to our crowdfunding site. So if you flip over and you look at it, and I was proud to post it on my Facebook, and my brother called me late last night to let me know he was going to be one of the first donors to it. I think, Lisa, you were the first. So thank you. So please share it with your networks. We know how incredible they are. So reach out to people, ask them. This is where every single dollar will count. And I hope that this will get an enormous reach if each one of you is willing to take and push this forward. The other thing that I know Bobby forgot to mention was that she is going to be hosting a Facebook Live session with Gloria. And we think that that's going to get, how many followers does Bobby have? It's hundreds of thousands. So we think that that's going to get a lot of attention, and then we can guide them to the crowdfunding site also. So I think that we have a few good things up our sleeve, and we hope with each and every one of you making your personal commitment to this and engaging your networks in this, that we will be able to take this over the top. So Lisa, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this. And Gloria, thank you for allowing us to do this. Thank you. I'd like to invite Jonathan Potter, who is the Dean of the Rutgers School of Communication and Information, to say a few words about how achieving this goal of getting us over the top over 3 million, because that's going to happen, it will happen, is not the end, but actually a beginning. And so he's going to tell us about all of the important, amazing programs. And as he said to me, I said, I'll pitch you a ball. He says, no, do it cricket style, bowl me a googly. So he and I understand that. So thank you, Jonathan.
Hi, everyone. I thought I should start off by saying I am a feminist. And I don't see that as an uncontroversial thing to say, really. To me, it's as natural as saying that I'm an anti-racist. And that's one of the reasons it's been so wonderful and humbling to share this room today with a wonderful, wonderful set of people, and to really enjoy and be stimulated by last night's event, which was a really electrifying discussion of a number of the most crucial issues that we're facing at the moment. I, like Subha, am enormously excited by where we are of coming to the point with this process that we're on. So I see it as we're standing on the station, the train is coming in, and it's a pretty fast train. You can see the lights. It's not New Jersey Transit. Maybe it is New Jersey Transit. And maybe it's the Acela, I don't know. But it's going to go somewhere, and we haven't yet fully defined where that is. But the countryside that it's going to go through is a really challenging countryside. The context of this, where we have someone who is going to be passionately interested in gender, feminism, race and diversity, and media, but in broader context of economics, of the tech digital progress that's happening, some of it wonderful, some of it challenging, the likely disastrous increase of inequality that there's going to be in the next decade as increased automation and flawed political processes throw people out of work, the sheer difficulty of maintaining a social polity that works in a way where our media structures are being fragmented and changed in ways that are hard to understand and indeed to challenge. And that can be in the context of literature, of politics. There are various ways of engaging with this analysis, of contributing to what will undoubtedly be some serious struggles. So my role here isn't to define what this chair is, but rather to say that we're looking for someone who will define it, who will open it up and define that path forward. And I'm, as I've said, really humbled to be part of that. It's attracted me. It's one of the things that's attracted me to come from, I guess you've spotted, Subha spotted, from a long way away, to be enormously, warmly accepted and supported by the community here at Rutgers, which is a fantastic, public, diverse, radical, energized, intellectual, scholarly community. And that, I think, is a prospect that anyone would relish to take on. And I'm looking forward to working with colleagues at Rutgers to make that appointment. Hopefully we'll be starting to look soon. Thank you.
So, we've come to this. The day's coming to a close. I'm sad. Our final roundtable of the day, Sexist Coverage and Covering Sexist, Gender, Politics, and New Media, will be moderated by Professor Khadijah Costley-White. Khadijah is an assistant professor in the Department of Journalism and Media Studies at the School of Communication and Information at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. Her research focuses on race, gender, and politics in media, and her forthcoming book discusses the media's role in the rise of the Tea Party. Khadijah has served as the MacArthur Foundation as an external advisor in journalism and media. Khadijah? And then, well, because I'm going to do this for you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'd like to invite up my panelists. You guys can come up and I'll introduce you. We have Kirsten Savali, who's a senior writer and associate editor for the Root.com. Her provocative commentary explores the intersections of race, social justice, feminism, politics, and pop culture. She received the 2016 Vernon Jarrett Medal for Journalistic Excellence, which honors exemplary reporting on Black life in America. She was named to Ebony Magazine's 2015 Power 100 list and was awarded a 2015 John Jay College of Criminal Justice Guggenheim Fellowship for her work on criminal justice. And she resides in Natchez, Mississippi. So yeah, people from everywhere, by the way, on this panel. So thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you.
Leslie Sanchez, sitting here to my left, specializes in U.S. elections as well as the Hispanic Latino marketplace. Hispanic Business Magazine called her one of the nation's 100 most influential Hispanics. She's the author of 2 critically acclaimed books and completed one of the first in-depth studies to examine the unique challenges women face on their road to the White House. She also has served as a deputy press secretary at the Republican National Committee and was appointed by President George W. Bush to serve as an executive director of the White House Initiative on Hispanic Education. And currently, Leslie is a CBS News political contributor and freelance producer for their 24-hour digital news network, CBSN. and she also serves as a political contributor to CNN. And last but of course not least, we have Bim Adewunmi. Did I say your name right?
Close enough.
I'm married to a Nigerian, but I don't actually pronounce names
that's
correctly.
okay.
Yeah,
That's
don't
okay.
tell him, please. She is a New York-based British journalist and author. She is a senior culture writer at BuzzFeed and writes a weekly column in The Guardian specializing in pop culture, feminism, and race, and might win like furthest traveler for today for panelists. Yeah, so please welcome our panelists. So we're going to have a conversation probably touching on a lot of the stuff that we touched on today, and maybe as Gloria Steinem, who's sitting like 2 feet away from me right now, suggested earlier, maybe we can start digging into what does this mean then? What does it mean in terms of the work that we do and how it shapes that? So my first question, actually, before I started, I really wanted to acknowledge that this university was built on indigenous land, that it belongs to the Lenni Lenape people, that it's stolen land. I want to acknowledge the people who built this university, the enslaved people who were brought here to construct these buildings and to make this place. And so I just want to hold space for that before we jump in. Okay, so. All right, so let's go in. So my first question is, how do journalists hold women politicians accountable in the media without it being sexist? Is there a way to, because I felt like during the election, right, we had a lot of, and I was one of those like critics of Hillary Clinton, right, and one of those young millennials who were on that side, and there was a lot of like, well, you're doing this because it's sexist, the way that people are kind of criticizing Hillary Clinton, and there became a question of, well, can we kind of critique her? Can we hold her accountable without it being sexist? I'm just jumping right in, yeah. That's right.
Well, I'll answer that because I was rather critical of Hillary Clinton during the election. I think there's a way to do that is not founded in her being a woman, not founded in sexism or misogyny. Malcolm X said, if I'm for the truth, no matter who tells it, for justice, no matter who is for or against. So if I have a problem with immigration, and I have a problem with Hillary Clinton in Honduras, and I have a problem with sending children back, saying we have to send a message that that's not going to happen. I have a problem with the vilification of black and brown mothers, with welfare reform. I have a problem with the crime bill. I have a problem with being the candidate for white people in 2008 and switching to being the candidate for black people when Bernie Sanders becomes kind of the standard for what whiteness represents. So we can have those criticisms of her. And I think what got lost is because it was such a binary. It was such a, if you're on this side, you're on this side. It didn't leave room for a lot of nuance in the conversations. So that's where it got tricky. You know, we're not going to talk about what she wears. We're not going to talk about her hair. We're not going to talk about what her husband did. Hillary Clinton is a grown woman with a long track record that we were able to critique and agree with without going into any of that.
Yeah, well, and do any of the panelists feel like, yes, that's true, but also Donald Trump, right? Like, I mean, but also, are we holding him to the same standards? Are we asking him the same questions? Are we?
There's an interesting aspect. I think your question is interesting because of that. Hillary Clinton, you have to unwrap it because there's so many layers. So generationally, if you were familiar with her husband and if you're familiar with the Clinton presidency, then there was some bias, positive or negative, toward how you felt about that, and that carried over. And there were the Saturday Night Live skits, of Bill Clinton walking around in his bathrobe, wondering what to do, if he was the first man, what would that situation look like? For Republicans, it was a cringeworthy moment, the thought of the Clintons again having that kind of power, and they did bring that inherent bias to this. But I think there was a very fair point. There were very legitimate policy issues that you could go one for one and really compare and contrast all of the Republican candidates, and certainly Hillary Clinton. But when they introduce, whether it was her husband on the speaking circuit, or there were just so many on the right with Donald Trump. We can unpack all of those. But when they introduced that into the political ecosystem, we had a responsibility to address it. Now, the knee-jerk response was, oh, it was sexist. You're just looking at that. No, actually, there is a there in some of those situations, and we had to be strong enough to power through that. You couldn't argue that the whole Billy Bush thing, that there was no there. We had to investigate and unwrap all of that, as difficult as that was, because it was very germane to the election. So I think whether the journalist introduced that, it was a piece of news that was discovered, or the candidate themselves put them in that position, they were controlling some of this narrative.
Yeah, and now I have to catch up on some Saturday Night Live, apparently.
It was an older one.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, and part of the reason I'm asking this question, I'm going to show a couple of clips, if Rachel... Because I'm thinking about, tough questions. I'm thinking about the coverage in general. And I'm thinking about Hillary Clinton. I'm also thinking about Sarah Palin and some of the ways that she, was asked certain questions, and the way that the media sometimes picked that up, and the way that they didn't necessarily pick it up with Donald Trump. So here's Sarah Palin getting asked, if you guys remember, this became a very huge, kind of turned into a big thing once Tina Fey kind of picked it up. But her being asked about what she read, and then I'm going to show kind of Donald Trump being asked about what he read.
I was curious, what newspapers and magazines did you regularly read before you were tapped for this to stay informed and to understand the
I read
world?
most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
What ones specifically, I'm curious that you...
All of them, any of them that have been in front of me over all these years. I have a vast variety of sources where we get our news to. Alaska isn't a foreign country where it's kind of suggested. It seems like, wow, how could you keep in touch with the rest of Washington, D.C. maybe thinking and doing when you live up there in Alaska? Believe me, Alaska is like a microcosm of America.
And Donald Trump. And the funny thing is, I saw this through the representation on Saturday Night Live, actually. Once I watched the real clip, I was like, oh, this actually makes sense.
Sorry, I just want to see where it stopped.
We didn't show you all of yesterday's interview with President Trump. During our sit-down, we also asked him how he keeps busy after the day is done. Here's what he said. What do you do at the end of the day? What do you read? What do you watch?
Well, I love to read. Actually, I'm looking at a book. I'm reading a book. I'm trying to get started. Every time I do about a half a page, I get a phone call that there's some emergency, this and that. But we're going to see the home of Andrew Jackson today in Tennessee, and I'm reading a book about Andrew Jackson. I love to read. I don't get to read very much because I'm working very hard on lots of different things, including getting costs down. The costs of our country are out of control. But we have a lot of great things happening. We have a lot of tremendous...
Okay, so how many people heard about the first question and answer between Sarah Palin and Katie Couric? And how many people heard about the second answer between Donald Trump and Tucker Carlson? Yeah, so this sticks out to me because, and actually because I started to feel bad for Sarah Palin as some of the coverage went on, not because of her policies, but because of, became a fixation on how she carried herself, all sorts of stuff. But I guess I'm wondering, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my thing. Leslie, in your book, and You Come a Long Way, maybe you talk about women reporters being harder on women candidates. And so I'm wondering, thinking about this exchange between her and Katie Couric, do you think that that's still true based on what you saw of the 2016 campaign? And also, do we think that this is fair? This is the way in which kind of Sarah Palin goes viral here and Donald Trump kind of does not.
I mean, I think one of the things that I think about regarding Sarah Palin is that she is in many ways just as ridiculous as Donald Trump. And I use that word in terms of kind of like, this is a ridiculous situation. And I get to say that because I'm also foreign. So I'm like, what the hell am I looking at? So there's a lot of that. But I also think one of the reasons why I heard so much about the Tina Fey thing is that she's still relatively rare. The fact that she was tapped to be this, VP candidate, again, she was one of, and the circumstances of her being selected was very much the kind of counter was to counter, you know, the black dude, right? So we're going to bring a nice white lady in. And it was so nakedly pandering that I think already we were so predisposed to be against her. Even those who were for her were kind of like, but. And I think that's something that kind of bled through to the way she was treated. Because half the time, the question that had gone before whatever question you were going to ask her was, isn't she ridiculous? And now a question. And then they'd begin it. So there was a whole set of circumstances that made her already someone that you were going to go after, because your ambition was to, your goal was to kind of unmask the ridiculousness in front of us. Now for Donald Trump, of course, we have a very similar situation where we're kind of like, this is a patently ridiculous man. But we're also at the point where he's doing several ridiculous things.
All at the same time.
All at the same time. So you after a while, it's horrible, but you pick your battles. It's like, we all have an understanding that he probably doesn't read that much, so this isn't that big a deal. And yes, we do go harder after women, but that's a learned thing. We've been told that you don't want to appear soft, so you got to go hard, right? And so you have a question where you can ask a question of a man, and he gives an answer, and it might well be a bullshit answer, but you kind of let it slide a bit more. But it's a woman, so and especially if you're a woman asking another woman, you're so aware. What's that thing that Margaret Atwood said about you are observing yourself being observed? So half the time, you're kind of like, right, if I don't ask this follow-up question, then they're going to say I gave her an easy ride, so I'm going to go extra hard. And that's one of those things that's a constant thing. You know, that question that the answer that Sabrina gave in the last panel about wanting to ask a question about Muslims, but also feeling as though, well, surely somebody else will ask. And if I ask, then it's a Muslim woman. And straight away, this ridiculous idea of my objectivity is gone. But of course, it does affect me, but it's also newsworthy. These are not mutually exclusive things. So it's a difficult thing. I think we know about the Sarah Palin one because, also the Sarah Palin one is funnier, which is very key. So one of them gets picked up because it's I mean, at one point she says any and all.
I'm reading a book on Andrew Jackson, but I can only get through a half page at a time.
And that's the other thing. So
funny.
It's very funny, but it's funny. I don't know, it's funny in a different way. I think what I did see the Andrew Jackson thing picked up a lot because of the nature of his presence on American currency and the conversations that had been happening, and Tubman and Hamilton and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So I saw a good amount of coverage of that segment. To be fair, but I also think if it didn't get much traction, part of that also is just the basic thing that we've learned, that we give men passes far more than we give women, and it's very difficult to kind of nail that down and kind of go, and here is my statistical analysis. But it's also something that half the time we know when we don't have the stats to hold it up, but we know.
Yeah. I mean, Donald Trump, he's the best reader. He's the best reader ever.
The best reader.
No one reads like Donald Trump. I will say this. There is no way I can talk about being a woman without being a black woman. So, for me, we have to talk about white men. We have to talk about not only white men and white women. We have to talk about kind of NIMBY, not in my backyard, black people. We have to talk about classism. We have to bring all those things to our coverage, and that's why that student in the background, she made her statement. Girl, claim being an advocacy journalist. Claim that. There's nothing wrong with that. You have Ida B. Wells, who had an anti-lynching campaign, who was rigorous and righteous at the same time. So we have to be very, very clear that we're not going to give anybody any passes. If you're a woman journalist and you're not naming Sandra Bland, and you're not talking about our children being gunned down in the street, if you're not talking about a Jacqueline Craig or Jerica Belton or a Marlene Pennington, you're not my sister. I don't owe you anything. So that to me is, when we talk about advocacy, it's the truth. We can't start in the middle. We deal with the media that quote-unquote runaway slaves was considered media coverage. But we're not going to talk about the fact that slavery is an inhumane, vile institution in the first place. That's not the story. That needs to be the story. So I don't believe in giving, whether you're a woman, whether you're a white woman, a black man, a black woman, a white man, like, what's the truth? What's the story? Like Amy Goodman says, we're not, we're the fourth estate. We're not for the state. So whoever their representative is, that's who I'm coming for. And that's
Yeah, I knew it would be dangerous to be on a panel with you because I'm about to say amen. I'll try to keep my
I don't know that I'll get a lot of amens to it, but that's okay.
No,
That's okay.
I was
like
reading
the
your
open
book,
part.
and I really enjoyed thinking through some of the stuff you were saying in terms of thinking about how women are represented and what's happening in terms of whether or not we've come very far today and whether or not we haven't, you know, so please.
No, and I was very humbled, and I learned a lot writing that book, and if you look, it's Donna Brazile and Hillary Rosen and some colleagues, you know, who were really championing it internal to that fight, who applauded the book the most. My Democratic colleagues probably more than my conservative ones because they don't like to hear, you know, they bristle at any of the criticism. But I think you really had to get in and understand, and you had to figure out where your role was going to be. And I think that's interesting, you know, where your lens is, your inherent bias, whether you want to think about that in your coverage or not. There are two things I see that are a little bit different. One, Donald Trump is with conservative media, right? He's with Tucker Carlson, very friendly. There is a criticism that they wanted to put Sarah Palin with conservative media first so that she could get warmed up and understand the cadence of a national campaign, because it does take about 4 months for a national candidate to get used to that rhythm and that level of criticism. And even Barack Obama had difficulty in the beginning. We all do, regardless of how skilled you are. It is a new level on a presidential campaign. But she didn't have that. She didn't want to take that. They put her right into the deep end. And let's think about it from the context. So one, I see it's a pass. It is really a pass. It was not this hard journalism. It was a bit of a different softball interview. Tucker Carlson was going to let him kind of, you know, not have the follow-up. Katie Couric has a very different role. Katie Couric was one of the first people, media darling of American journalism. Katie Couric was the first person who walked away from that to do hard news on network television, take a very different stand. And she had her own challenges, you could ask her about it, where she felt the newsroom was kind of challenging her and her credentials and capability to do that job. Here's her first interview. She lands it through her tough chops and like shoe leather, and she's not going to be soft. And there's this odd moment when these two women are, you know, here you have the affable Palin trying to dance around this, and she is tethering her back to this question. She is not going to let go. So it's apples and oranges in terms of that, but it's also very strategic, and it tells you what they set her up for and what they set him up for.
Yeah, no, I really like that. I really like thinking about juxtaposing these two and what kinds of stakes a white male, you know, on Fox News has interviewing Donald Trump versus kind of the stakes that Katie Couric had at that moment when she's trying to talk to Sarah Palin. And I also I interned at the White House for a bit, and when I listen to this answer now, I'm like, yeah, actually this makes sense. No politician actually will admit what they read every day, generally, because they're not going to tell what press that they are consuming on a regular basis. In fact, when I was there, I was very specifically told, do not tell the press what we watch every day. You know, so it's interesting because I'm like, yeah, she's actually doing what a regular politician would say. They say, I read a lot. I read a lot of different news magazines. I like consuming news. But we all kind of read it very differently, I think. And partly because it's coming from this woman who actually is a lot more like qualified than Donald Trump for the position, and so
my dog is more qualified.
Yeah, right. But I mean, like, she was, you know, a governor, you know, who had to leave, but she was a governor of a state, you know. I mean, yes.
Well, you know, you raise another interesting thing, if I can go there. So part of what you come a long way maybe about is we called it the ditz, the witch, and the media darling, and it was Palin, Clinton, Michelle Obama. So if we remember, right, as soon as The Star is Born, remember Will Blitzer, when Palin gives her speech, A Star is Born, lipstick on a pig, the whole thing, rising. This was the first time that you had the top of a candidate on the Democratic side doing opera research on the bottom half of the Republican ticket because she was surging. The money was extraordinary. All of that momentum was massive until the interview between this and Charlie Gibson. And then it was like, wow. Overtly, like nakedly unqualified. And that has been one of my criticisms too. If you're going to get that opportunity, why didn't you go back, even after the election was over, Hoover Institute or somewhere, and study the scholarship and get cogent on your own ideas and do the work to be a legitimate voice for the mantle and gift you've been given? But she didn't.
Well, and I would have agreed with you before November 2016 that practicing and working hard was what would get you in the White House.
Not a reality TV show. No offense. But, you know, there's ways to go about...
But then we have a reality TV person in the White House now.
Exiting your position in leadership and as a governor. I mean, these are all not things you're setting as models for the struggle that women have to get to those positions.
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing about Sarah Palin is she goes on to set up other women candidates, right? So she continues to rake in money even when she leaves this race. She continues to kind of have her little mama Grizzlies and kind of usher in this new kind of brand of conservative women. So she's a fascinating person to hold up. I would argue that nothing about her critique stands after Donald Trump has won the White House, but I think it's something to kind of hold. And I love the way that you kind of start your book. I think the way that all the women here kind of think about themselves and think about their positionality. You start your book saying, I'm a Hispanic woman. I come from this understanding of feminism in this particular way, and this is how it helps me read what was happening in the political scene. And I think it's really important to kind of bring that lens. And so to that end, I'm also thinking about how do we hold women reporters accountable in the media? And so I've been... If you, like, any of you who are my Facebook friends, Brittany's my Facebook friend, if you've seen when Megyn Kelly was announced as a new anchor for NBC that she's leaving, I was livid. In part, it had to do with this particular moment. Yeah. Yes. No, it's the Jesus Can't Be Black.
Santa Claus should not be a white man anymore. And when I saw this headline, I kind of laughed and I thought, this is so ridiculous. Yet another person claiming it's racist to have a white Santa, you know? And by the way, for all you kids watching at home, Santa just is white, but this person is just arguing that maybe we should also have a black Santa. But, you know, Santa is what he is, and just so you know, we're just debating this because someone wrote about it, kids. Okay, I wanted to get that straight. But Jedediah, when I read the piece, the author seems to have...
Okay, she, just in case the kids missed that, she does come back in later on to assure everyone that Santa is white, and you should not be afraid of that, right? But then I watch her go and, like, play with Jimmy on the late night shows and, like, go to NPR and get interviewed by Terry Gross when she does this book tour. And there's this rise of Megyn Kelly as this kind of, I mean, they're calling her the next Oprah. Have you guys seen this? They call, yeah, right? They're like, she's going to be the next Oprah, right? That she's kind of branding herself in this way. Oh, yes, this is what's happening, right? So, I mean, and that brings up a whole thing with Oprah that we're not going to go into. But we got one lane. But I want to talk about the way that Megyn Kelly does not get held accountable for bolstering white supremacy in a lot of the ways that she's done coverage over the years. And so, you know, and not just to sink in on her, but I do want to kind of hold her up as an example. How do we hold women reporters kind of accountable for the work that they're doing?
Well, in many ways, Megyn Kelly is emblematic of white womanhood in general. And I think that's one of the things that when we talk about who we're allowed to forgive but I mean, in terms of who benefits from power structures, inevitably at the top you have white men, the way the world has been ordered. And people don't often think about the people alongside white men a lot of the time. And those are often white women. And so we transfer a lot of the power that white men have onto their partners, which is not to say they do not suffer their own oppressions, but they suffer them in very different ways. So Megyn Kelly gets to rebrand as something mainstream when she has come from a place of quite toxic news telling. And she gets to rebrand, she gets to come back, she gets to be, quote unquote, forgiven. She also gets to be called, you know, in these question mark headlines, you know, a new feminist hero?
Yeah.
Fuck, yeah. Like, am I drunk?
Yeah.
I felt like I was on pills, and I didn't take any pills that day. So you can imagine, I was very confused. So these, I think, are the things, that for me was the thing that stuck out to me, was when this happened, and there were, you know, there have been other moves in network news and cable news, and there's another, I'm not yet familiar with all your cable news women. There are so many. But hasn't there been a move from one conservative thing from another woman? I forget her name now.
Yeah, Gretchen, was it Gretchen Carlson has moved? And Greta Van Susteren.
That's the one.
Yes.
And I saw that again, and I kept thinking, isn't it amazing that you get to rebrand like this? You get to just slide on in. And it's kind of like, it's fine, because you still get to be objective. You still, even when you say something as patently ridiculous as, Santa is just white. Which, if anybody else said that, okay, I'm going to stop. It just strikes me as something that if you're not paying attention, you should be. A lot of the time we focus on the Bill O'Reillys and the Roger Aileses, and that's fantastic. But something that we also forget in that rush to kind of go for the obvious villain all the time, because that's the thing, the villainy is rife. What it looks like, the image that we plaster on top of it, is almost always a straight white man, and that is not always the case. Sometimes they have help. And by sometimes I mean often. They have help. They don't exist in silos.
Yeah,
these people are alongside. That's what so Megyn Kelly is in many ways unsurprising in this new, someone who has said that kind of stuff gets to have a second stage, gets to have a second wind, gets to rebrand, gets to kind of take the time away from the screen to, promote her book and to regroup. And she gets to be silent in the face of things like, what happened to Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. And then she gets to come back, freshly baptized.
Yeah, well, Kirsten, did you want to dive in?
I mean, she's right.
She's right.
I mean, she's right. A lot of racial violence comes from white women. A lot of when I heard that question, it read to me as, how do we hold white women accountable? Because black women and women of color so often have to hold those things in tension when they even enter into a space. You're talking about our communities in general. So I mean, you're absolutely. I mean, she's right. That's what it is. She's able to get that pass. In a way, I would say it's just strictly white women, but then Stacey Dash came and messed it up for the home team.
Yeah.
But she's absolutely right.
Leslie?
It's okay until the Stacey Dash thing,
She doesn't upset.
I get what you're saying. I think on one side, I look at the positive side of this. I think any woman can rebrand themselves. Lord knows I think I did between the bathroom and here. I'm just saying I was this and that at the table at lunch, and thank God we live in this country we can do that. Because we're always navigating to really find our best footing and our understanding. And we wear many hats. And I think you can be enlightened from one to the other. If anything, I have another issue with kind of the women. And it comes from a lot of Spanish TV, and it's the sexualization of it. And I've seen, if you look at the ads on Megyn Kelly, I'm like, wow, girl, you were like a journalist. Like, what is this, like the lingerie? She's wearing lingerie on the air. I'm like, wow, we've come a long way, like Spanish TV. And that was really stark to me. It was the imagery.
Yeah.
Because we are objectifying ourselves.
But do we have any concerns about kind of the mainstreaming of white supremacy? So what I tell my students is white male supremacy is not just a person, it's an ideology, right? And so we have to kind of understand that this moves with people who look all sorts of ways. Do we have any concern about the mainstreaming of white supremacist ideology? I mean, if people agree, and not everybody has to, through Megyn Kelly. I would say somebody who says Sandra just is white and can't be black might like white people more than black people. But I would say, do we have any concern about the mainstreaming of that ideology through this kind of move to NBC or move to these other spaces?
I really think it's going, I think that the statement is ridiculous. And that it wasn't called out. It's just questionable. But I'm really curious.
CBS will be called out.
Absolutely.
She had said that on the morning show of CBS, that Santa is white.
There'd be a national uproar.
But it's on Fox, that's why it was.
It's on Fox, which is...
It should have been on CBS, I'm not...
Well, and the interesting part is, it's because it's so siloed, we talk about these echo chambers where everybody's kind of promoting the same idea, and it didn't raise, to your point, it didn't raise all the flags that it would as you mainstream or normalize it. So I'm really more interested to see this transformation, this rebranding, as from one to the other, and what goes with that.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I don't think all women are allowed to rebrand themselves that easily. That's first and foremost. To her point, there was a huge uproar around what Megyn Kelly said.
Yeah, there was
not from white people so much, but there was a huge uproar. So that goes to whose narratives and whose stories and whose backlash ends up being the prevailing narrative. That was a huge thing. Also, I think it goes back to how when we talk about whiteness, it's very easily the default. Objectivity and whiteness they're seen in the same way. Voices of authority, and we're not so quick to name whiteness or white supremacy as the core and the root of so much institutional violence. So Megyn Kelly on Fox saying this, you know, there's, like Brittany said earlier, there's reasonable racism too. You know, there's nice racism too. You know, we have, you know, Chris Matthews on, you know, he's white and, but about liberal racism on that end of the spectrum, him talking about how do we talk about immigration reform in a way that reaches out to the Rust Belt, and how do we do this? So there's very different ways. I don't believe that Megyn Kelly is kind of the gateway to normalizing this, because white supremacy is very much normalized in this country, in media specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have Tom Brokaw and Chuck Todd, talking
is
about
the
the Moynihan report being amazing, and incredible, and that it still speaks to them, you know, to this day, right? So that's very much true. But it was upsetting. It was very upsetting.
Yeah, you did.
But and I don't want me to pick on Megyn Kelly. I think for me, the interesting thing was watching her kind of perform this in these spaces that theoretically should have asked these questions, right? Like, I would think NPR would ask these questions. You would think her going on to kind of talk about her new book and her, you know, that she wouldn't just get away with this PR term, but it almost seemed like there was this move to, well, she's a woman journalist, so we're going to kind of be happy for her and embrace the fact that she's successful.
She's a white, blonde woman journalist.
Right,
Yeah.
and I think in terms of, for me, a big part of this is the idea that if something is called out, I'm not saying you should go on an apology tour, but I'm saying that there should be some sort of tangible evidence that your way of thinking is evolving. And I think about this when I'm thinking about the pop culture writing that I do, when, for example, a showrunner is called out regarding certain elements of their show. And oftentimes, they either will knuckle down and say, actually, I said what I said. And then you're like, oh, okay. Or you get the person kind of like, wow, I've had so much critique, and I'm really thinking about this. Thanks, guys. And then they go away. And then in the second or third or fourth season or whatever of their show, suddenly you notice something, and you think, oh, this is a direct response to this particular criticism, this critique. This has been taken on board, and there seems to be not necessarily contrition, but there is some idea that, oh, I'm listening a bit closer, I'm listening a bit harder, and I'm trying my best to kind of navigate these stories with wider lenses. In the case of Megyn Kelly, again, not to pick on her specifically, but in the case of so many of these people who get to rebrand, and I'm re-echoing the echo of my echo, essentially, there are some kinds of women who get to do that over and over again. And also, they're questioned less, and it just so happens that they often look like Megyn Kelly. They are beautiful, thin, or slimish, white women. They get to do that. I cannot imagine saying something so, first of all, idiotic. Santa is Santa. It's a fucking invention. All of it's invented. Everything's made up. The second thing also is then...
Are children watching? There are
children watching. It's time they learn, man. Listen. I'm from England. We have Father Christmas. He's also fake. I'm just saying, your parents worked very hard to buy you presents. Thank them. Not Santa. Anyway.
That's the takeaway on Twitter. Really.
I'm just saying.
No Santa.
No, Santa exists. He's lovely. He's also black. But anyway, my Santa was black. But I think there are parts that are oiled. They are lubricated differently. So you can reinvent, but it's bloody difficult. And in doing so, you have to give up a little of yourself. And oftentimes, people like Megyn Kelly do not have to give up anything. And they just slide into the next role as easily as they did every other role. Even when they've come from difficult circumstances, I do not wish to negate any of whatever challenges she may have faced in her life. I'm saying that this particular sort of rebranding, where you can move from what is essentially, Fox fringe, not so fringe, whatever, to primetime network. I mean, that's magic.
Yeah. And I think it's important to call this out, particularly because we've had these conversations throughout the day on what it is to be a journalist and what it is to do public service and what it is to understand oneself as neutral and, these kinds of ideals when, what we're seeing play out is not this, right? It's not kind of people necessarily holding these ideals in the work that they're doing. I had a quote from you down here, Kirsten, but you basically repeated it, so I don't really... Where I had you kind of talking about the Women's March and the move to be more inclusive and talking about kind of white women's complicity and the oppression of people of color. And again, this is something I keep trying to come back to in terms of journalism and the ways in which white supremacy always seems to kind of not be called out explicitly in that place. And so I'm not going to talk about my book, but I do think it's particularly interesting in thinking about conservative media. Now, Megyn Kelly is also interesting and useful, and I think this might be some of the reason she gets protected, right? She's useful in thinking about how women reporters get treated under this current administration. And so Donald Trump's attacks on Megyn Kelly are pretty widely known, but here, I'll show you kind of a clip of some of the back and forth. We can get it to Brian. Oh, I don't know.
Let me redo it. Hold on.
Okay, so if we can get it.
I can get it.
There was kind of a concern that if you saw over the campaign, there was a lot of kind of Donald Trump refusing to go along and be interviewed by Megyn Kelly. It's okay if you can't pull it up.
Got it. Loading.
It's okay.
It's okay. We can actually. There's I'll show some of the tweets. I think his tweets will say enough, right? So
I think it was the pop-up.
Yeah. So we'll come back to this, and I'll show you some of the examples of the tweets about her. The question here, I guess we can think about this as this plays, is how do women reporters tackle sexism in the media in the Trump era? And so, thinking about the ways he went after Megyn Kelly, which I think, I think that's part of what kind of bolsters women journalists around her in a lot of ways, and helps protect her, is because of what plays out between her and the president, now president of the United States.
Fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Totally Rosie O'Donnell.
No, it wasn't.
Honestly, Megan, if you don't like it, I'm sorry. I've been very nice to you, although I could probably maybe not be based on the way you have treated me.
It's okay with me that there's, some consternation. I'm sure he'll get over that and we'll be fine, and so will America.
She gets out and she starts asking me all sorts of ridiculous questions, and, you can see there was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever.
I mean, do we want to win? Do we want to insult 53% of all voters? What Donald Trump said is wrong.
I didn't even say anything because I didn't even finish the thought. I was going to say nose and or ears because that's a very common statement. Blood pouring out of somebody's nose. It's a statement showing anger. She had great anger. By the way, Dick, let me say this. Only a deviant would say that what I said was what they were referring to. The fact is she asked me a very inappropriate question. She should really be apologizing to me. You want to know the truth.
Mr. Trump did interviews over the weekend that attacked me personally. I've decided not to respond. Trump, who is the front runner, will not apologize. And I certainly will not apologize for doing good journalism.
Roger Ailes, who's an amazing guy and an amazing executive, frankly, he called me yesterday.
Yeah. You can show some of the tweets. So here are some of the tweets that Donald Trump tweeted about Megyn Kelly. She must have a terrible vacation. She's really off her game. What's the next one? I like the Kelly file much better without Megyn Kelly. Perhaps she can take another vacation. And then he retweets, the bimbo's back in town. I hope not for long. Right. So I mean, I think it's, in some ways, I think, and then she says, no, I am journalism, right? So this kind of helps prep her, I think, for her move to NBC. But part of the concern that this brings up is then how do we, in the Trump era, talk about, how do women reporters do their jobs? How do they kind of face and deal with the sexism I imagine is coming out of a White House built around this kind of rhetoric? If you guys have any thoughts about that.
I mean, it's what we've been saying all day is you just do your job. I think it's one of those things where I never want to play Oppression Olympics. I mean, I'm very skilled. Should I be required to? But I also think that a lot of the problems and the questions that are coming up now have been answered in some form or another for years. There's a lot of stuff that is not new. What we're seeing, obviously, with Donald Trump's administration is the smoothest example of mainstreaming. Like, what is more legitimate? than the White House, like as a platform, as a symbol, as an idea. So to have these ideas residing in that place, within that administration, gives a sort of new life. It's kind of like pure oxygen for these ideas to kind of go out into the world and grow, like at an alarming rate. But the problem is not new. It is perhaps more eloquent, and I use that term very lightly, or it's at least, it's more, it's there, it's available to you at all times. You don't have to dig at all. It's on the surface at all times. There is no, you're not submerging it in like softer language. It just exists. And in the meantime, women have been doing their jobs. So yeah, you're going to face something that is, I suppose, a lot more, it's coming at you like straight in the face, and you get to kind of, you have to kind of tangle with it in a very different way. But the kernel of what you're doing, which is to say you are ignoring what you can, you're calling out what you can, and then you're getting on with the rest of your job as best you can, that continues. And I think, yeah, we can, you know, everyone has said this before, like, I can have all my various isms, all my identities wrapped up in me. I am also a journalist. And my job is to be accurate and to be fair. But I cannot divorce any of my, the things that make me me. Those things don't leave me. So I can look at the stuff that Donald Trump said to Megyn Kelly, and I can name it for what it is. And I can also say, yeah, but Megyn Kelly also has consistently trash opinions. And what she calls journalism is sometimes right, often wrong. Those things are all true all the time. But also, Donald Trump said some real shit to her. And that's something that I can call out at the same time. Because what's coming for Megyn Kelly will come for me. Often has, and harder. Mm-hmm. So those two things, they're not mutually exclusive. I can say your work, that the work that you were doing in this particular story or this particular thing is valuable or is trash or whatever. And I can also say, oh, by the by, that thing that the president said to you when he was a candidate also fucked up.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm also thinking about whether or not there are like institutional ways to challenge this too. And, you know, on SNL, for instance, they do it by, you know, they find out that he can't stand the fact that Spicer is represented by a woman, right? And so they're like, oh, we're going to keep doing this, right? Like over and over again, and maybe hire a few other women to play people in the White House. And I'm wondering, on the journalism side, is there a way to kind of incorporate that same kind of, I mean, I guess it would be resistance, right? The resistance to what this administration represents in terms of the kinds of bodies you deploy. I mean, I think you were even talking to me earlier about being deployed to the RNC and to the
yeah, and that was an assignment that I requested because I knew, and this is the thing, at the point at which the RNC and the DNC was going to happen, I'd been reading the coverage of the campaigns, both sides, and a lot of the time, you know, like we said, we've kind of established that lots of the narratives that we were hearing about the election and the voting demographics was very much kind of like, let's try and understand this working class white man in the Rust Belt, which is a fine endeavor to kind of pursue. But everyone who was doing that was also a white man. A lot of the time, not everyone. Sometimes they would send a white woman, which was mind-blowing. But every so often I kept thinking, for an election that is so wrapped in race and in, you know, religion and all these, you know, immigration status, and here I stood in the newsroom, a foreigner, a black woman, and also a Muslim, and also a Nigerian. My country is not one of the places, you know, my second country, I have dual nationality as a Brit and as a Nigerian. You know, Nigeria is not on any lists at the moment. It could be tomorrow. We have a sizable Muslim population in Nigeria. I myself am Muslim. Nigeria is also, you know, densely wrapped up in, I don't know if you've heard about this terrorist group, Boko Haram. So I live in a state of constant fear that if I leave the country, you know, the US. I want to go visit my family this summer. And I keep thinking, well, will my Nigerian, you know, my citizenship as a Nigerian, what if while I'm out of the country, Nigeria is added to that list and I can't get back in? That's something I'm thinking of. That's one of the things that I didn't, you know, when the executive order about the Muslim ban was kind of, broke the news, I was going to go down to JFK as a reporter. And another part of me kind of went, but I'm also on a visa right now, and if I get arrested, what will that do for my visa? So already things are being curtailed without anyone even telling me. You have an understanding of how precarious you might be, and I've done this, my immigration here is completely legal, and I still live in fear of what could go wrong. But I kept thinking, I'm in this newsroom right now, The RNC is next week, or whenever, we did this months in advance. The DNC is the week after. I want to go there because I am tired of reading narratives of white men who tell me they've gone to these rallies and looking out. This is the kind of paragraph you might read in one of those pieces. Looking out, I saw these men were not unlike me. Well, obviously, yeah. And you would have all these conversations, you know, kind of like, I stand behind this guy. He looks a bit like my brother. And we talk about blah, blah, blah. I understand where he's coming from, but I say, aren't you worried that Donald Trump might be racist? No, he tells me, because he's going to fix my job. And then you would read all these things, and I'd kind of be nodding, kind of like, great. And then at the end of it, you kind of go, oh, there's no payoff. There's no, you know. And then I took off my mask, and I was a black woman all along. No. It never happened. It never happened. And I saw no black women. I saw no Asian reporters out there. I saw no Native Americans, no Hispanic. And I couldn't get my head around the idea that these are the very people that he's, you know, at the point where he goes to Michigan and he's talking about Detroit, not in Detroit, or he's talking about black people in suburbs. And I'm like, yeah, there are black people in suburbs, of course, but he's going to white suburbs. He's having these conversations about groups, and there is no one in those groups in the room. Those speeches weren't for us, but it was made explicitly clear. I'm talking about you, not to you. And the easiest way to come about, to kind of circumvent that, was then to be in the room. So yeah, I was on the floor on the final night of the RNC, as around me, Trump, Trump, Trump swelled. My heart has never beat so fast. Like, I didn't fear that I was going to get, like, beaten up or whatever, but I felt, I mean, I'm British already, so all nationalistic things make me just itch. So I was like, this is too much. Even the USA. And I was like, all right. And that happened at the DNC as well. And that's the other thing as well. It doesn't sound any different when it's from, you know, the DNC or the RNC. It sounds like militaristic might and fear. That's my personal reading of it. The minute I start hearing USA, I just kind of go, nah, fam, I'm British. Nah. And I kind of pull myself out because it's too much.
Yeah.
But my point is, even in those rooms, I went to both conventions and I could count oftentimes, these are the black journalists. These are us right here. The rest of the room, half the time, the rest of the time was white.
Well, and I'm imagining that this has to do with what's going on in newsrooms. And so, you know, I'm wondering, you know, if you or Leslie, or you or Kirsten want to jump in, what's happening in the background? Are we deploying people of color to these places? Are we watching these institutions take up for women when they're being attacked as journalists or as reporters? Are we watching the newsroom kind of take up for people of color and make sure that and try to push back at the administration? What do you think is playing out so far?
I've been on both sides of that newsroom. I will say that on the positive side, I think there are a tremendous number of women, especially both white women and women of color, who have fought to include diversity, both male and female, in the newsroom, in the production bay, and on air. And it, you know, you can say because people need to increase shareholder value and all those different things, but I like to think that they get that as the country has become diverse so much, so should the coverage. Even it's just seeing someone who looks like me. And that's changed, and that's been a radical change, I'd say, in 8 years that I've been doing this, and to see the evolution of that. But make no mistake, the people that get to those roles work very hard to get to those roles. I mean, I like to say we're a 20-year overnight success, because I know so many people that we, blood, sweat, and tears, have done it from nothing, from farm working to network news. That's not an easy jump. Right. And speaking through the lens of what I know. And I applaud how hard that is. I look at somebody with such dignity like April Ryan, who stood in that newsroom at that press conference, get called out, you know, why don't you make the, you know, it's like, go get the coffee. I was I was aghast. I was just shocked. And just so stoic. And I see the barrage of questions and kind of the back and forth that comes. And I've been on both sides. I have been on the side as the press agent, as the spokesman, never confrontational. That's not my style, but not that confrontational. But I've been on both sides of that equation. And it's just, I really do hold it to the person. I think you can do this job with dignity. You know what you're there to do regardless of ethnicity and gender. doesn't mean it's not difficult. It doesn't mean that bias is not there, but at the end of the day, you have to file and get that story right. And that's what I applaud. It's those small steps every day that these people are doing.
Yeah, Kirsten?
You know, I always say that as journalists, it's not as important that we have the right answers as it is that we have the right questions. We have to ask the right questions. We have to be intentional about who we are talking to, who we are bringing into a space, which voices, which narratives we're amplifying, which ones we're disrupting. That has to be intentional. I wrote a piece a couple of years ago about how mainstream media was killing Black America. And it was about the script that, you know, that is followed from Black children not being seen as children to the things they would cover in different neighborhoods on the 6 o'clock news, to the titles, to the images, where people would see those things and how that would give people such fear, and how that translated into police departments then feeling emboldened to go and occupy these communities further, which leads to our children being on the ground. Or the school to prison pipeline, because media is like an IV drip of poison. So, you know, when it comes to how do we hold journalists accountable, and how do we just tell the truth, that's really it. We have a job to do. When it comes to politics, you know, white supremacy is a party crasher. It doesn't matter, you know, you may see it from Republicans, you may see it from Democrats, you may see it on the left, you know, further left. I say you have to be very, very careful that, you know, we're not talking about a leftist all lives matters movement where, you know, there's no race analysis, but there's a class analysis, and then you look up and it's still all white people in leadership. You know? So I want someone of color, someone specifically Black people, specifically Black women, to be representative, to be there, but you've also got to have the right politics. And it's also not that just because you're white and you're on my side, then it's okay if you lead me, because you still don't know where I'm coming from. And so when I think about media, I think about journalism, I think about how we make sure we get it right, is that we are intentional about whose voices are there. We are intentional in knowing that this system is not broken, that it is working exactly as it is intended to work. And we are not starting stories in the middle, that we're looking backwards to what has not been told to this point. So if we're talking about poverty in an inner city, you know, we cannot tell that story. Yeah, there's poverty. We can't tell that story without saying how it got there. We can't talk about Trump, oh, he's laughing about the inner cities. Yeah, he cares about the inner cities because that's gentrification. You know, that's my buildings are there. Let me get more police departments in there. Let me make it more welcoming. We saw it in New Orleans. Let me make it more welcoming for white people to come in here and make money. So yeah, he cares. Let's talk about what he really cares about. You know, if we're talking about the increase of Black girls in prison or in juvenile detention centers, okay, let's first talk about the fact that Black girls are punished more in school, right? That we, when it comes to the drug war, sure, there are Black people on drugs. Let's talk about systems, our harm reduction of color systems, our trauma of systems that make Black women and Black people have to medicate, right? That makes them go and use drugs. And the police are already there occupying their communities, who then arrest them, who then take their children away. These things are not advocacy journalism. This is the truth.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to be reporting. So when we talk about what's fair and balanced, what I hear is a lot of erasure. I hear a lot of let's not advocate for these people. When you're not advocating, what you're doing is you're telling the truth. Yeah. And that's just what we have to continue to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask these questions. I know we've been discussing them today, but I feel like sometimes we don't make the move to, well, what and a lot of people are saying, well, I just do my job, right? I feel like a lot of the answers are just like, well, just do your job this particular way. But we're talking about something bigger than just doing your job. I mean, a lot of times it's not just the individual, right? We're talking about how do we kind of make structural change. We can't just do it by telling women reporters, like, put your head down and just stick to the facts. You know, that you have to kind of talk about what that means, what the facts are, right? And talk about how this functions on a larger scale than just this individual reporter.
A great responsibility. Oral history, witnessing for our people, the responsibility we have with the platforms to be in a space, it's a mission.
Yeah, and this brings up a question, but I think I'm going to end with that question, which is going to be about how do we witness, how do we tell these stories, but also how do we tell them for audiences large and small, and whether or not that's even something we're aiming at. I do, thinking about Donald Trump and these tweets to Megyn Kelly, he's like the tweet president, the Twitter president, right, in a lot of different ways. And I'm thinking about social media. We've talked about it today, about harassment on social media, harassment online, and I guess my question, I mean, you're probably going to say yes, maybe it's a duh question, but is it more obvious, is it more acceptable now under this administration? You know, do you think that this kind of treatment on social media, so these are examples of reporters. Cosmopolitan interviewed some reporters about the kinds of trolling and abuse that they get on Twitter. And so these are graphic. Hopefully the kids signed off when Santa was black or white, but or non-existent. You know, one is to Elizabeth Plank at Vox.com, and a couple are to Sally Khan, yeah, these are lovely. And Lindy West actually announced in January that she was leaving Twitter, and this was part of her sign-off. Twitter, I think, starts at 2 to 13. Yeah, that's what I have.
Starts at 2:13.
Obese cow. Fat people should be rounded up and shot.
2
minutes.
The hater who I mentioned above.
Also, it could be technical commentary for free. I answer questions for free. I teach feminism 101 for free. Let's hit anything else. Twitter for the past 5 years has been a machine where I put in unpaid work and tension headaches come out. I write jokes there for free. I post political commentary for free. I answer questions for free. I teach feminism 101 for free. Off Twitter, these are all things by which I make my living. In fact, they comprise the totality of my income. But on Twitter, I do them pro bono, and in return, I am micromanaged in real time by strangers. Neo-Nazis mine my personal life for vulnerabilities to exploit, and men enjoy unfettered direct access to my brain, so they can inform me for the 1000th time that they would gladly rape me if I weren't so fat. I talk back, and I am feeding the trolls. I say nothing, and the harassment escalates. I report threats, and I'm a censor. I use mass blocking tools to curb abuse, and I'm used further for blocking unfairly. I have to conclude, after half a decade of troubleshooting, that it may simply be impossible to make this platform usable for anyone but trolls, robots, and dictators. Surprisingly, none of
that's it. Yeah. So, you know, I had a question, but let's even just, what's your first responses to kind of listening to Lindy talk about her experiences on Twitter?
Lol, same. I mean, what can you say? Nothing she says is new. I always find it interesting when people kind of, you know, men do those social experiment things, and they kind of go, I lived as a woman online for 3 hours. What I learned shocked me. And I always kind of go, oh, okay, women knew this. It would help if you just believed us the first time. You don't have to do the experiment. If I put my hand up and say, this is the shit that's happening, it's happening. I don't even get that much nonsense. I mean, I tweet about films. It's bad enough because people really get passionate about films. And I tweet about, like, handsome dudes and, like, food. So my life is very, very simple on Twitter. So I don't often get like real kind of horrific stuff. It's come occasionally. I've been called the C word a few times, and not in the affectionate British way. Hey, Jonathan. But in like horrible, the horrible gendered slur way, where you kind of go, oh, I think you're referring, oh, okay. So that's very, very different. But I don't live anything near the level of people who write about politics full time. I've seen stuff that I shouldn't have to see. You know, stuff that makes you want to kind of do the Rutger-Hauer kind of monologue at the end of Blade Runner. You know, stars off the belt of Orion. Like, oh my God, I've seen some stuff. But it's never happened to that extent for a sustained period for me. But everything she said is completely true. The idea of Twitter as a job, and I said this, I kind of took a break from Twitter a while ago, and it felt to me very much like a job where I was unpaid, and my manager was an absolute basket case who hated me. And I was like, wait, no one is paying me to be here. And I'm on Twitter for the number one reason that I'm a show-off, and I'm very funny. So I like to show off about my jokes on the internet. And then every so often, I'll tweet something, and I'll sit back, and I'll be like, that's pretty good. Because, like I said, I'm a show-off. But the minute it stops being joyous, the minute where, I'm happy to do hard work, but Twitter isn't necessarily the best venue for that. Social media in general isn't the best venue for that. These are all these companies are relying on the fact that you're doing this for free. And the only person who gets any kind of value is the person who is the online troll. Because they're getting massive amounts of joy from doing this. Now, I'm not saying women should shut up and go away, because obviously that's part of what they're trying to get you to do. But I'm also saying, man, protect your head. Protect your neck. You don't need to be taking this. I see people engaging like long for hours, and I'm like, fam, go do a face mask. You don't deserve this. You can call something out and then you can move on from it. And that's, again, I've never been doxxed, and I pray to God that never happens. But I'm also saying that there are ways in which you can utilize all that knowledge and all that, intelligence in other ways that are not nearly as soul-crushing as going on Twitter to be called a series of horrible names. Again, I am not saying the women who do fight back should not do that. You have every right to do so, and if that's something that you want to do, go ahead and do it. But I also know that I have a very low threshold for ridiculous stress. There are enough stresses in my life, and I don't even mean like the basic, I'm rushing from here to there. I'm talking about the stuff that damages on a cellular level, which is higher in women of color. I want to live long. Okay, my grandmother died too soon. I don't want to go out like that. I want to be here at like 102, toothless. And if I'm going to be on Twitter, it's not going to happen. Because that's the way to an early grave, in many ways. And I can't live like that. So that's my choice, is I completely understand everything she's saying, and I fully agree with it. And her leaving, when I saw that she'd left Twitter, I applauded. You don't have to take it. You've never had to take it.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to add in? I'm wondering, what is the worst thing that you've been told on social media? If you can repeat it out loud.
No. Mine get very ethnic. And I'm such an advocate for Twitter. It's so funny because I was like, everybody's a tweet, loved it, communicate, built a lot of relationships in the early days from colleagues and other journalists. It was like a big fan club. Like, oh my gosh, love your work, great. So the tribe I'm following, it's just so interesting. I like their dialogue and very different viewpoints from my own. But I want to have a sense of what's being said, what's being, the thought, the thinking. And I follow a lot of young people who are doing some really innovative things. I'm like, Blavity, Morgan DeBron, if you're not following her, she's just a rock star. She has started kind of a black millennial movement, and I showed up, I encouraged her to come. I found her on Twitter, encouraged her to come to an event, and she shows up in like Iowa, and she said, okay, we're going to do a march. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Because they told me ahead of time. And she has 3 million black millennials on her network that she's able to mobilize, and they let her know, and she's always Snapchatting with them and talking to them. And now she's getting funding for her VC, from a VC, thank you very much. And she's really growing and sparked, and she's part of that movement because she is that movement. You can't replicate that, it's very authentic. But I'm looking and listening to different ideas, and then you'll say something, and I laughed. I told someone, I said, it was getting so hostile right around the election time that I was like, I had to mute so many different things, even on Facebook. I'm like, even among friends, I'm like, okay, I can't take all your shouting. So I said, now it's just like babies and puppies that I have in my stream. I'm like, what happened? So it's like my therapy. It's just like, and everybody's like, oh, I'm so hostile. I can't take the Facebook. And I'm like, I don't know, my stream's great. You know, it's very happy. It makes me happy. There's like a puppy, you know, falling downstairs. It's so cute. You know, but in fairness to that, it is a distraction. It can be, best term I've heard, soul crushing. It has. And part of what the training I do for women that want to run for office is I talk about creating an imprint for their digital brand, but to prepare themselves with armor for what is incoming, because I don't think you can ever be prepared. They're prepared for an attack maybe in mainstream media, you know, this or that, or what you did, or misuse of funds, or, you know, some relationship you had in business, or something else, you didn't live in the district. But the type of social media undermining and unraveling that is so psychological is extremely difficult to deal with. Yeah. And for that reason, I think it's something that needs to be in your repertoire in terms of you need an understanding of how to deal with that. Whether you walk away, whether you use your tweet strategically, whether you edit out and mute. And I get the same criticism if I mute. They're like, oh, you're just muting, so you're feeding into the beast. But it's a balancing. It takes a lot of time. Yeah. It takes a lot of intention. You cannot do this halfway. And those are the things to think about if you're going to be in this space, because it's not the learning curve is steep, but if you get it wrong, it can be extremely damaging, not only for your career, but just for your mental health.
Right, Kirsten? I'm curious, like, do you get a lot of...
Negro bed wenches, probably.
Oh, yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, that's always great.
Yeah.
Sounds
Negro
like
bed wench. Let's see, what else?
Adult film.
That's probably just anything along those lines, you know, when we're talking about street harassment and rape culture, then, you know, you get that from some black men. As your Negro bed wench, or you're in bed with the white supremacy or the white man or something, whatever the case may be, and then you turn around and you talk about, you know, police brutality, and it's like, you know, my Nubian queen, I love you. So, you know, you just never know. You never know from day to day what you're gonna get. I can say though, you know, same thing goes with race issues. I talk about street harassment, rape culture, feminism, and you know, I'll have a lot of white women, and they're like, yes. And then I talk about, you know, kind of liberal racism and the things that go on and how black women are erased. And, you know, I'm the angry black woman. So I have kind of, as far as white men, this is going to sound really, really mean. I really do not give a damn really what they have to say. So when I hear it, or, you know, oh, you're racist, and oh, you're dumb, and oh, you're this, and I don't, doesn't even register to me anymore at this point. Because it's just so stupid and so asinine. I'm like, you're in your mother's basement in your flip-flops, and you just, you know, you're stealing your neighbor's Wi-Fi, and I just don't have time to do it.
I like your imagined general white man troll.
I mean, it's just like, you are really, really pathetic at this point. It doesn't bother me, but, you know, that's probably the worst. You know, that's probably the worst thing that I get on Twitter is kind of the hate from different directions, which I think speaks to being a black woman in the space, because any given day can come from any given direction. You know, you just have to be. I value Twitter. I value Facebook. I value the relationships. A lot of the stories that we've gotten from, you know, Michael Brown, you know, the Black Lives Matters movement, a movement for Black Lives, rather, at this point. All of those things have been amplified on Twitter. For sure. So, you know, I center my people, you know, and so the rest of it just.
Yeah, I mean, and I think too, I was joking with you or telling you earlier that, you know, Leslie Jones, it came out, I think maybe on Brittany as well, or somebody had posted about Leslie Jones and how she's blocked a series of black women, like black women scholars, black women critics, because they criticize some of the representations that she does, like when she's a black cannibal eating like white men on Saturday Night Live, like what those representations mean. And so I feel like there's this weird thing about who's a troll, who's not a troll, what kinds of conversations get to happen, who gets to be held accountable. I mean, I felt some kind of way being like, a Leslie Jones troll after she blocked me. I was like, all I said was don't be a cannibal.
I'm going to be honest with you.
You know,
the Leslie Jones story, and I don't know if you all read this, I was on that, like, I was really like, she has got to be kidding. Is she joking about slavery? Is she joking about, breeding? Is she joking about all that? And I think it might have been Roxanne Gay who wrote something about, that's how she has been positioned in the world. Kind of laughing at my pain as being a larger black woman, a dark-skinned black woman, a loud black woman, and that has been, her experience even now. So I mean, that was one of the situations, because I can't deal with Leslie Jones. I can't. It's not funny. I find it very, very stereotypical. She's playing into a stereotypical role. But what Roxanne Gay said gave me pause when I think about her. But the way she claps back at black women who like, come on, sis, like, this is problematic, and blocks them, that's the problem. Yeah. Like, we have to be able to engage when we talk about things like that.
Yeah. I mean, she's also a product of a very specific kind of stand-up comedy background, and I found in general that many stand-ups have a very kind of hard line. It's a joke, and that shuts things down. That's across gender, across race. People will not even defend, they'll just shut down. And Leslie in many ways played into that, because that's how she came up. Like, the idea of having to stand up and defend your joke is completely alien, because it's kind of like, I'm here. I'm gonna say the thing, and that's it. So in that regard, I kind of read her responses. Sorry, this is a segue. But I read her responses as kind of like, oh, you're doing what comedians do. But on the other hand, as well, the Roxanne Gay piece, yeah, absolutely. This idea of processing your pain in a very different way, and that thing of laughing so you don't have to cry. And I kept thinking also that, again, I've reduced it. I've made it very simplistic. That's not what her comedy is. No, that is not only what her comedy is. But there are so many things that I think, and this is Twitter at its best, right? Where you have a very kind of entrenched idea of something, and then it doesn't happen often, I'll be very clear about that. Someone will introduce an idea that will make you pause. And like you said, it gave me pause. I don't have to agree with it, but I can at least understand that this is a legitimate line of thinking. This is an avenue I can go down for at least a little while, and then pull back if I find out, actually, no, this is a road to nowhere. Or if it's somewhere that's going to lead me somewhere more interesting. I mean, it happens so rarely that I remember I took screenshots. I'm charging my phone, so I can't bring them up now. But there was an event, someone was talking about popular culture and black women and representation, and a very nice white lady from somewhere in America, I was living in England at the time. I was in England at the time. That's why I said it like that. I'm not being disparaging. And she said to me, she was like, I really enjoy your work and blah, blah, blah. But also I have to say, I think you're wrong here. I think, you're lacking some real context since you don't live here and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, all right, fair enough. And I said to her, I don't agree. I said, actually, I was very long-winded, I think, in 2013. And I think I did that dreaded thing of replying to her over several tweets, which is a bad thing, because no one wants to hear your thoughts, it's Twitter. Anyway, I did all of that. And then maybe a year and a half later, I'd forgotten about this. This was just something that happened. She came back and she was like, hi, I don't know if you remember our conversation. And I didn't. But she said, oh, I just wanted to say that, I was wrong. Thank you for pushing back and blah, blah, blah. And I was so shocked that I screen grabbed it, and it's still on I've changed my phone twice since then, and I've saved those photos like, it does work. This one time it worked. But I thought it was actually quite, again, not to kind of give her cookies, but I was like, oh, that's nice of you. You didn't have to come back and say anything. I'd forgotten about you. And kind of just, like, whatever. But she came back and she was like, and then of course, because she came back, I couldn't even find it within myself to be extra gracious. I was like, yeah, thanks for telling me. Ugh. But what I meant was, screenshot, because this never happens. No one ever comes and says, oh, I read your piece, and I'm so moved, and I've changed my ways. Yeah. And then this time it did. So sometimes Twitter gives you gifts, but the rest of the time it gives you turds. So you have to throw out the turds.
Yeah, I'm going to open up for questions. I had one last question. Maybe we can close with it after we go through, which is just, do you feel like you break out of silos? Do you ever feel like you've had a piece or had something that you feel like reached far and wide? Because we talked about, now we're talking about muting and curtailing and creating the certain kind of media circle that lots of people are doing. Do you feel like there's any sort of tricks here, especially in this climate, to kind of reaching past what you kind of have created as an audience? And it might not even be a goal, but I'm just wondering. We can come back to it.
Back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll come back.
Yeah, let's open up. Yeah. Did you have a question? Okay, go ahead.
All right.
Please don't start up by apologizing.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're right. So I guess you tackled diversity, Leslie, in newsrooms, and I think everyone did. So in this era, like I've been asking this about the Trump era as a journalist, it's really challenging. What is the progress of inclusivity rather than diversity in your newsrooms, and how do you think me as a journalist graduating in a few years should tackle inclusivity and not just diversity? Because I struggle with that here in the university too. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it's really hard to be a Filipina who's only like in a Latino community where I have to take classes in order for me to learn about my culture under the Latino and Caribbean studies, which they only really talk about the Philippines when they colonized my country. But okay, I digress. So
I think your question was how do you kind of make sure that these newsrooms are inclusive?
yeah, and like,
You know, I'll tell you, the biggest and the most interesting aspect that has had an influence on newsrooms as it comes to long form, which is not just the 3-minute packages you see every night, but kind of long form journalism, which is really needed now more than ever. And I heard somebody talk about Vice and some of these other projects where is the democratization of all these different kind of docu-series platforms that have allowed you have Vice and you have Amazon, you have Netflix, you have all these different places for young people, different people to start telling different types of stories. And even just the advent of technology, more so than when I was your age trying to do it, you can create your own. We were talking to some students who are doing documentary and social good documentary. Those become extremely important artifacts in a mosaic in terms of how you're thinking about journalism. I do believe they're important to start right now because it's going to change. And I think now that there's more of a conversation in newsrooms to create space for long form, to tell different types of stories, and they all, in the newsrooms I'm in, they're all related to culture and ethnicity and looking at kind of post-Trump America. Because we're all kind of asking the same types of questions, but before it was in ethnic media that I used to hear that. And I think what's refreshing now is it's more in mainstream media. And I'm like, oh, I've been doing this 20 years. Like, I got this. I got 20,000 stories related to this because we lived it. So when you say inclusive, I think inclusive is the goal within the newsroom. You bring that richness in. But what's changing is there's more platforms, more openness, and more of a desire to see and hear from a different perspective, maybe than before. And that is extremely rich. I mean, that alone is encouraging because then they want to see more women, more diversity in the hiring and the interns. I mean, you have to start at every level. And that's changed just probably dramatically since the last presidential election.
My dad used to say that integration without education was one of the worst things that happened to the black community because it led to assimilation without uplift. And so when I think about newsrooms, I see that a lot. What you're talking about is discrimination, right? So, and we have to place it on the power structure. So how can we make sure that there is inclusivity? We can't really make sure that happens. That's a power structure that's been there for a while. So we can fight for it. You know, we can sound the alarm about how it's not present, but you know, these newsrooms are predominantly white, and that shows in a lot of the coverage. So I would just, and then some of the people that they do allow in are people that they know will follow the script that's already been there, right? So I honestly, you know, in addition to sounding the alarm about how discriminatory these newsrooms are, is support alternate media. You know, there are indigenous writers, there are Latinx writers, there are black writers that are phenomenal commentary, phenomenal analysis. Look for them. I mean, they are there. Look for them. Build your own platforms. Build your own presence, you know? So don't look to a mainstream media and then feel like you're not worthy, right? You know, you are. Your voice as a Filipino, as what you were just saying, if you feel excluded, build your own. You will build an audience. People will listen to you. There's someone hungering for that just like you are. So look for them.
I think the platform thing is very important. I mean, I work for BuzzFeed, so clearly I have a large platform. But even within BuzzFeed, of course, it's not as though I'm walking into, you know, the office and it's a sea of black faces. You know, but I also know that when I was hired at BuzzFeed UK, shortly after my hiring, we took on, I think, 4 new black reporters in various capacities. And I think, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm Jesus. I'm saying that my presence there, a couple of people said that they would never have applied for the jobs if they hadn't seen me there. So again, I'm not claiming as though I brought them with me, but I brought them with me. So I like to think that sometimes visibility pushes in ways that many things can't. People knew BuzzFeed was a place that they could visit, and they went to visit, and they clicked, and they liked what they liked, and they shared, and whatever. But suddenly, me being there gave somebody else, you know, and that happened for me as well. I remember reading The Guardian as a child and finding one of the columnists in the Weekend magazine, which is where I have a column now, Hannah Poole. She used to do a beauty column, and it was called The New Black. And I remember seeing her, and when her little photo byline, and when I realized, because, you know, Hannah Poole could be anyone, and then I saw her face, and I was like, wait, Hannah Poole is a black woman? I was already very aware that I was good with words, and I was likely going to be a journalist already. But then suddenly there was a goal that was unlocked in my brain, which is I'm going to have a column in The Guardian Weekend, and now I do. And when I joined BuzzFeed, they were basically kind of saying, I mean, no shade to BuzzFeed, I understand why. They wanted an exclusive contract, and they said, oh, you know, will you leave the column behind? And I was like, I will absolutely not leave the column behind, because I could be somebody's Hannah Poole. And I think that's part of the thing as well. You have to kind of push where possible. Do the thing that you know. God bless Barack Obama for his greatnesses and bless him for his weaknesses. But that thing about, you know, be the change and that stuff works. You exist in the space, and your mere existence is the beginning of something. You get to be the continuing of something. So Hannah Poole left, and then I came on, and eventually I will leave Guardian Weekend, but hopefully I will leave it with maybe 2 other black women with their own columns.
Yeah. It's nice. Dr. Cooper, Brittany.
Thank you all for this. So my question is really for Kirsten and Khadijah, but I'm open to hearing from anyone. One of the things that I struggle with in this political moment, and I'm asking this because I feel like we had different dialogues about this during the campaign and after, is what we might call outrage politics, right? That there's a way that, so one of the things you talk about, Kirsten, that I hear really passionately, that I really fucks with, right, is the clarity. I'm not going to mince words. But it also feels to me like young people of color who are using digital media platforms to do all of this work, people are very comfortable with our rage, actually, as compared to some of our more serious analysis, right? So folks, you know, so you can get lots of clicks when you drag white women, for instance, right? We learned that from the CFC blog. And so I wonder, but this thing you said a moment ago about, you know, that white men, you don't even have any expectations of them, so it doesn't even really float for you. And so one of the things I worry about is how can we both be really clear and honest and not equivocate about white women's participation and complicity and perpetuation of white supremacy, but not be madder at white women than we are at white men. Because it feels to me like when I look at the election, part of the way that Donald Trump floats in is it's not just on the right that they lowered the standard for him. It's also that sometimes unwittingly on the black left, we're so mad at white women for trying to talk to us about feminism when many of them are still racist, that we don't actually then say, like, that we let, like, this white dude snuck in and stole everything because we were so mad at Hillary Clinton for all the ways in which she had been racist. And she deserved every critique, but it was like our feminist analysis couldn't shift and move enough to, you know what I mean? And then we have a Trump, and that's not the fault of the black left, but like, I wonder about writers and our responsibility around analysis. How do we hold
all the rage, because the thing you lose is like, because then sometimes when I say that, then people be like, why? Oh, you ride for white girls, and I'm like, do you know me? Like, have you met me? Right? And so it's like when you ask for a tempered approach, or you get accused of respectability politics. So I never know, how do you, when we're talking about how do we get the coverage right, there were so many pitfalls, and you have a level of clarity that, and I feel conflicted, because I was like, I have a very conflicted relationship with white women around feminism, but I also was like, but I'm really clear that if I had to pick enemies, I'm gonna pick the white dude every time, which is why I couldn't ride for Bernie Sanders, because when I listened to not because I didn't like his platform, but because I was clear, okay, I'm trying to get it in, but I was clear that black women gave Bernie Sanders his progressivism around race. He didn't have it before black girls ran up on stage and forced him to, right? And so I was like, why y'all think this white guy is our savior in ways, like, when has that ever been the thing that's gonna get it for black folks, right? And so I just wondered about that, and about, not that we have to agree, but like, how can our feminist analysis do all that kind of work, right? Like, yeah.
So, couple things.
Yeah, sure.
Couple things. One, let me tell y'all something about Brittany Cooper. When I had all this politics, the same thing I have now, and I was wondering, where do I fit in feminism? Brittany Cooper talked to me about black feminism. So y'all need to give it up for this sister right here. You got a rock star right here. I will say this. When I'm talking about Twitter, not worrying about those white men, that's not worrying about in political arena. I'm talking about the white men on Twitter who come in, they got the eggs, and you're very clear that they don't have anything else to do. Not giving like a Donald Trump a pass, or a George Bush a pass, or a Kasich, or a Rubio, all these different men a pass. So I think you're from the South too, but for me, most of the racial violence that I have seen or experienced was via white women. There was white women, a nun, you're not good enough. White woman who put her hands on me, and I said, you do that again, you're gonna be in a cemetery. There's a huge mammy restaurant where you have white women who come in and they come to the pilgrimage and they love it, and they can be in this Confederate space, and oh my God, and in the big ball gown. So my relationship to white women has been different, right? Coming from the South. I was very clear. It was a very nuanced conversation, because I had to write Donald Trump Made in America. Donald Trump is clearly fascist. He's clearly misogynist. He's clearly dangerous. Hillary Clinton is clearly an accomplished person, clearly better suited for the American presidency, but also hold what the American presidency means. How much their imperialism, they're still there. That even if, like a Barack Obama, you're a black man, right? But you're still perpetuating the system of white supremacy. You're still perpetuating the system of imperialism and violence to our different people, right? So I get what you're saying, but I have been intentional about, Bernie Sanders, whose failing was not having a race analysis, but having a class analysis, with white women who had a kind of a race analysis, but no class analysis. And by that's kind of simplistic way of saying it, but Bernie Sanders, who was talking about, let's universal health care. Let's talk about, let's get rid of Wall Street, and how those focusing on those things help black people, versus, a middle-class white woman saying, hey, come ride with me, but you don't want to talk about reparations. You don't want to talk about police violence that makes you uncomfortable. You don't want to talk about the school to prison pipeline. So I can't really say that it's not, how we not as angry as white women, because I am. When I talk about I'm angry at white women, I'm angry at white men, I'm angry when we talk about black men and how they perpetuate violence against black women. So I firmly believe that you can be both victim and complicit at the same time.
Yeah, and I would add, the funny thing about this is I came into your work when you were dragging Tyler Perry, and I still yes, and I still wish that I could drag quite the way that some people can drag. Like, I can't do it, because I feel like my pieces, I don't get hate mail. Like, I'm not jealous, but sometimes I get like nice little letters from like old white women in Minnesota like handwriting me letters saying, I used to be a teacher and I really loved your little piece in Washington Post. You know, so I never get like hard, you know, sometimes in my comments, like I'll go looking for it and people will be coming for those people too. I'm like, I don't even have to fight you. There's people in the comments. So I think that's in part because my work is often like, I do like a historical piece and I start off with this thesis and it ends up, you know, so in the courts or in the Atlantic, I don't get the trolling and maybe I don't even feel like I drag necessarily. And so, like, a lot of my fiery stuff you saw was just on Facebook. Like, it was me just being like, I'm so mad at Hillary. And I get mad at black men, too. I have, like, a piece literally saying I'm so tired of black men, right? Like, and it's because I feel like there's a special betrayal when you have a group that you're like, you should be with us, right? We should be past this. It's been 100 and something years that we've been fighting with white women over the same stuff. Y'all can't keep acting like you deserve stuff more than us. You can't keep forgetting that black women exist. You can't keep saying it's our time and not remember that we've been setting the stage for 150 years now. Like, so I think for me it's when white women don't get it, when Hillary doesn't get it, and she became a stand-in for all the ways in which white women who supported her were willing to overlook her past racism, were willing to overlook the ways in which she talked about the LGBT community at a certain point. Like, we're willing to kind of say, well, that was just, you know, it's okay, she's different now. It's like, yeah, I don't know about that, you know? I mean, like, and so I think, and I feel the same way about black men, too. I'm like, we can't be still fighting y'all over this stuff. I can't listen to you defend Bill Cosby one more time. Not one more time. It breaks my soul down, you know? And so I think there's a way in which Donald Trump is what he is, and I understand him. He's actually, like, to me, like, white men on top, like being on top. They want to protect their interests. They're going to keep doing what they do. That makes perfect sense. But to see white women say, yeah, I'm going to jump in with Donald Trump on this. Because really, you know, I'm not really sure about black women. You know, they don't raise their kids right anyway. You know, so, yeah.
I get what you're saying, and I think that's a very, very important point, is that because we're so used to the violence and destructiveness of white men, that we're kind of like, yeah, okay, let me go over here because you know better.
Yeah.
Right? So I absolutely get what Brittany's saying there.
Yeah. So didn't somebody say earlier today, like, you critique the institutions that you actually respect? Was it here? Or, I mean...
Gloria said the New York Times.
Yeah.
On the New York Times.
Yeah.
Which I'm here for.
Yeah.
I think I have a few of those in the office.
Yeah.
But I guess it's because the thing I love is that y'all talk about really good analysis, right? Mm-hmm. You're talking about the sort of, so I asked another feminist sister about this and she said, yeah, well, the problem is they're women, so I have respect for them. And then the next breath she said, the problem is they're white, and so I can never ever trust them. And I was like, right. So, you know, so when we're trying to think about political solidarity or how do you move forward, I'm not here for any apologia for white women's racism, but I am like, is there a failure of our analysis, though? Like, is there something going on with our analysis where we've created a catch-22 that folks can't get out of? You know what I mean?
I think it's a failure of our politics, though,
in
a certain way. I think we've set it up so that, I think, to me, this brings, I know I've been dragging Megyn Kelly this whole time, but it brings me back to the ways in which she's allowed to kind of get a pass, like the ways in which our politics are set up, that it's okay to be a little bit racist or a lot of bit racist. It's okay to be a little bit anti-black or a little bit anti-Hispanic or a little bit anti-Muslim and still go on Terry Gross and have like a really lovely conversation about your new book. And so I think it's about our
question
politics.
About that.
Yeah.
So what is the solution, I guess, that really would the answer that you're really looking for? Because I see the Megyn Kelly situation, and I hear what you're saying there, but I also saw the criticism, and she was right in the line of fire, elevated her profile, got her to the next level. She's leveraging that, as we talked about, the rebranding in the way she could. And you're trying to tether her back to these issues, and I'm saying that's fair, but we don't know what she's going to do with that new role. She, again, brings it up again. So I don't know where the balance is.
But I say that, and I'm like, yeah, we don't know what she's going to do with that
We
new
don't
role.
know.
And that, to me, that's fear, right? Like, that's,
she got to the point where she was on that debate stage, and if you count and speak to the number of women that ever get that role, it's so rare. it's rare in terms and how hard they prepare for that. So I guess I've just seen it from the other side about the mantle that they hold. And she did a shoot. It was so personal. That's what was so shocking about that. And yes, it was elevated. And yes, she's moving to network. And yes, she's doing those things. But I guess my question is, where's the balance there that would make you comfortable?
I think I never lose sight of white women. The investment in sustaining white supremacy for some of them. So when we talk about, I can't be a black feminist and not talk about classism. Can't do it without talking about what's going on with our indigenous sisters, particularly recently in, Standing Rock. Can't do it without talking about liberation for Palestine. Can't do it. I just can't. And so a lot of people thought, oh, this is just, theoreticizing, this is not based in practicality, this is looking for purity. No, it's not looking for purity, but I just know what compromises I can deal with. It's not that, it's protecting that when we make certain compromises that we are endangering people. And so when we have white women who are, I feel like we can talk and we can build and we can be in community, but it's not my job first to make you comfortable. That if I'm angry and I'm angry for a reason, then if I'm angry because of a police officer who raped 12 black women and 1 black girl, and you don't say anything, then it's your job to build that bridge, not mine. So the solution lies with the people who need to do the most work. And at this point, women of color, black women specifically, we've been doing this work in different forms. We go back, we were talking about Fannie Lou Hamer. This is not new. We talked about Ida B. Wells. We talked about a Sojourner Truth, a Harriet Tubman. This is not new, trying to build these bridges and make this work. And now it's like, what else can we do? No, what else are you going to do? Because I have a right to be angry. You don't get to tell me I'm being divisive while you have not done the work that you need to do on your people, on yourself, to build that bridge.
Yeah, and I think part of the issue is that you feel, sorry, Bim, did you want to jump in?
No, please go ahead.
I think part of the issue is that you think with white women or with black men that they're almost there, right? You feel like there's almost a distance. If there's how far are you from understanding intersectionality, or how far are you from really being able to say, oh, you're right, I left ableism out of my analysis here, and I really actually should introduce that. In fact, police brutality is an ableist issue, is a disability issue that we should start talking about in terms of disability. And I can do that as a black person who's not disabled. I can say, actually, you're right? And that's where we expect other people to come from. We want them to say, yeah, you're right, and actually I should add that to what I'm doing, and I should do it in a meaningful way that isn't just letting my husband tell a bunch of black kids, you're the reason why people are getting shot in Philadelphia, as Hillary Clinton's husband did when he was deployed on the campaign. And so I think that's part of it, is this idea that we can push you a little bit more. If you just got this one step, you would be with us, and understanding other people to be further away. And I think too of Ellen. Ellen will go hard on LGBTQ issues. She will go hard, surprisingly. And she has this kind of, I'm Ellen, I'm not political, ideal. But when she brings people on, Caitlyn Jenner, right? Everybody's been talking about this Caitlyn Jenner feud with Ellen. But Ellen was like, where do you stand on marriage equality? Where do you stand on gay rights? And she was not playing with it. But then she has a sketch where she's making fun of, the rapper. Thank you. Yes. Nicki Minaj's body, right? And her having a big butt and thinking it's funny and not being held responsible for those kinds of portrayals. And so I think it's fair, but I think it's also about this idea that we've had forever and that black women have had forever. If white women just got it, we could get somewhere, right? 53% of them didn't side with Donald Trump. We could get somewhere, but.
Oh, okay. This is just a really quick question. So I think, Bim, you mentioned this before. You said you want to live a long life. I, too, would like to live a long life.
Amen.
So I remember you mentioned that there are certain things you wouldn't do just because for the sake of your mental health. So I was just wondering if, I'm also a journalism student. I'm going to keep this short because I know you don't have the time. But once I was writing a story about basically conservatives that don't feel like they have a platform to speak on college campuses, it was just like from a perspective of conservatives on campus. And I remember after I did a few interviews, I got this phone call, and I mean, you probably know what I'm about to say, right? Like, it was from a blocked number. They were calling me the N-word, and they were saying, like, you should go back home or whatever. Sure. And I mean, it's hard to scare me, so I wasn't scared, but I was more so annoyed because I felt like, I mean, number one, like, if you're going to call me from a blocked number, like, okay. Like, why don't you just, like, tell me who you are? And then, like, two, like, I was just more so annoyed because I feel like the culture of the United States now is so polarized and, like, racist that, you know, it allows for people to do these kinds of things. And I was just wondering, to tie it all back together, I guess, what do you, this is a question I pose to anybody, what do you suggest for young journalists like myself in order to just keep ourselves sane in this current climate of, like, ridiculousness, you know?
I mean, a good thing to kind of remember, I'll say at the very top of this, is that annoyance and anger are completely fine. And you should, I'm not saying you should encourage yourself to be in a state of constant annoyance, but it's fine for you to be annoyed. It's fine for you to feel anger. And I don't think those things are things that you should be striving to eliminate from yourself, because that itself is a problem. You cannot be on an even keel at all times. That would be, you would not do anything valuable. You know, and Maya Angelou kind of talks about the fire that burns things clean, not the kind that kind of leaves soot behind, but it burns it clean. Let it go through you. And then the aim is to make it useful, right? So the anger, I just want to say, is very much not desired all the time, but is necessary. And you should be not afraid to make sure that you remain angry at the things that you should be angry about. I'm talking, when I talk about Twitter and logging off there, I'm talking specifically about the very useless anger where I feel myself getting hot and I'm kind of like sweating or crying, and I'm just like, nah, it's not worth it. Have some ice cream. That's not, I don't know how many of you come from a Nigerian church background. That's not your portion. That's not your portion. You don't have to touch that. That's not for you. But the other stuff about feeling, you know, strongly enough about something that there is a rage in you, or there is something that you think, you know, there's that old internet joke of, you know, I'll be, you know, in bed in 5 minutes. Someone is wrong on the internet. It's a never-ending job, obviously, but there are some things that you cannot sleep without having written them down. You cannot do it without doing the reporting. You can't let it go until you've done the background reading and you've written this, what you consider to be this incendiary piece of work. Those things, that anger is completely necessary for your life, and that anger will get you to 102.
Yes. Yeah. Audrey, yeah, Gloria, of course.
How much time do we have? 5 minutes? Okay, I'll be fast because you've already said all the big and deep and good things. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But I just want to remind us that Megyn Kelly said she was not a feminist in her biography. She's no friend of mine. I would never be interviewed by her or go on her show. I've never gone on Fox News. I've never, you know, I mean, I don't know any of the, maybe some women at NBC cheered her on, but I don't know any who did.
Yeah.
But, you know, so she became a brand by being accused, and, you know, and I don't want to see her humiliated as a woman. I mean, you know, I even defended Sarah Palin when she was, you know, under fire. I mean, that's pretty extreme. But only because they were being humiliated as women. I certainly would never advocate for them in any way or have anything right. Yeah. Okay. Also, I think in the white women department, the married white women, you know, because in the last 2 presidential campaigns, I've tried to direct myself at Republican and independent women, because too many people say, Democrats, feminists, whoever, say, how can you be a Republican, you know, and that's never going to get us anywhere. So instead, I try to say, look, okay, the Republican Party, you didn't leave the party, it left you. It used to be better on sex and race, and some of us are old enough to remember when it was different. So let's just talk about the issues, and sometimes that gets us someplace. And the other thing I find gets us someplace is to say, look, the Chinese did not bind the feet of poor women. They bound the feet of rich women because they were the means of production of the ruling class.
Right.
These women have their heads bound, and they know it, in fact. And I think probably they have to know that before they get out a little bit. I mean, they have to have some sense of themselves. Now, on the bad Twitter stuff, I think the Women's Media Center should have a competition and give a prize to the woman who has the worst, most threatening, most ridiculous. It should be like the Academy Awards,
It'll probably be a black woman.
A badge of honor. Fuck them. I mean, it's ridiculous. Why are we sit around and kvetch, and we deserve it, and I do understand some are dangerous, so I'm not talking about that. We should follow those up.
Right.
But we should also make it a badge of honor. We have to somehow change the terms of the game, right? Yeah. And why Donald Trump has never realized that the past tense of Twitter is twat. I think we should remind him of that. He is so past tense.
Right.
And anyway, and then finally, I just wanted to remind ourselves of a wonderful, I'm pretty sure it's Robin Morgan's quote, hate generalizes, love specifies.
Right.
So really, we need to know each other as individuals and listen to each other and trust each other. I mean, there's no other answer. I don't think there's not a group answer, but there are plenty of great fan-fucking-tastic individual answers in this room.
Right.
And that's the important thing.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I think we have one last question.
Hi. I was going to ask a question about money. I don't know if that's a great way to end this segment, but going back to your discussion about being on Twitter and how it was all basically this free work, and then also this sort of call for young people, young journalists to sort of find their own platform if they can't find one, make their own work. So how do we what are some creative ways to find some funding for that type of stuff? If Brittany's students are going to do season 2 of their podcast, if Patricia is going to make her documentary, what are some creative ways we can find funds to support that work, especially considering that to sort of amplify women's voices or find women's stories, sometimes it takes a little bit more work to extract them from the archive or find the crew. And also considering that the return on investment, right, is not going to necessarily be in dollar signs. And also considering the fact that, especially in America, how much money you spend on something is a signal to other people as to whether they should pay attention to it or not. So considering that, what are some maybe creative ways that are maybe outside the sort of standard ways of operating that young people can find some funding?
Let me tell you, I cannot tell you how to find institutional funding, but I will tell you this. When I started writing, first it was free. Then it was like $20 a thing. Then it was maybe $300 a week where I was doing the work of a full-time editor at a big publication. I remember being high-risk pregnancy, being in the hospital with no support as far as, institutional support. I had my family being sick, not being able to take off because I didn't have days off. But I cared about what I was doing. And I had to find other ways to make money, too. I was still in the mental health field. I was working at a church in Los Angeles in a mental health center. So you got to hustle. If you want to do what, if you care about what you're doing, then you love what you're doing, you believe in what you're doing, you might have to get something else and work it. It's not, you don't get in this for the money. You know, so I mean, we're talking about 10 years strong, and I'm here now, still not making a lot of money, but I'm writing about what I want to write about. You know, if I had changed my message and gone an easier way, I'd probably be working with the DNC with some kitten heels on, pulling 6 figures, but I didn't. You know? So I'm just saying, like, you gotta believe in what you believe in and understand it's not going to be easy. It's just not. There's no fairy tale. There's no let me go and get a grant and get all this money and be able to sustain being a writer. There's just not. It's hard. It's hard and it's competitive. So I mean, you just do what you do. Someone will see what you do, and you got to hustle. Yeah. You just have to.
Yes, and as a professor too, I want to just say that there are organizations. So for like Black students, for instance, I usually say check out the National Black Programming Consortium, or check out NABJ, or check out, right, there are groups that have said, no, we want to build women up, we want to build up people of color, we want to make sure this stuff is happening, and they'll hook you up. I've lived with alumni, right? I got hired, my first journalism job was actually through an alumna who specifically was trying to diversify the newsroom. I'm glad to hear it's more diverse now. When I was there, I was the only Black person on staff at PBS for my show, and we were liberals. So I think you have to work the network. Sometimes there's stuff that people don't know about. Like, we were desperately trying to find Black interns for the National Black Programming Consortium to come on our show, and it was paid. And that was just because people weren't kind of seeking out. So ask around, look up groups that are institutional, and that should be helpful.
Actually, yeah, I agree. And there's been a lot more push post-graduation for paid internships because of the pushback for unpaid work, basically. And they're tremendous, not because of the dollars, but because of the access to the network. Because you never get a job based on who you know, but who knows you. And so you can have your individual platforms like Medium, which is extraordinary. You can be doing individual projects where you leverage resources. I heard a great example about it at lunch. You know, you're renting a camera. I need to do something. Let's share the cost. I'll buy you a pizza. It is a lot of that. I heard, and I just heard a young woman who made top 40, under 40, happened to be a Hispanic woman on Capitol Hill, like top 40 staffers in foreign policy. We were so proud of her. And she said, let me tell you, to dream big is free. You can dream as big as you want to dream. Fabulous. Big. Think is monumentous in terms of your career. But to get there is going to cost you. That's where the dues are, and that's where the hours of unpaid work and the 3 jobs and taking care of your family. And as women, particularly, most of us have that dual responsibility. It's not just yourself. I mean, it's all those other things, and may not have the access to the network that other individuals have. So it's an even harder climb. But it is very doable. It's very doable.
Approach us too as professors, right? Like, we have projects that we want to do. I'm constantly trying to finish up short films. So you can try while you're here to try to build up credentials. So when you go out on the market, you can say, I have a few short films. I have this that I did. I have this. Use the resources that are here now. You're paying for them, honestly. So make sure that you take advantage of it before you go. I know we have to close out. I want to thank this wonderful, wonderful panel. And all of you for your patience. And I just want to end on the idea that, because I know you asked, and I'm not sure this was answered, I think as we leave here, hopefully what we take away is that we all should be doing this work. So when you say what can be done, when we're calling out white women, calling out white men, we should have a white man go on Chuck Todd's show and be like, no, Black Lives Matter, and just surprise the hell out of the panel, right? Because they're like, no, we didn't book a Black person today, we booked you. Like, why are you talking about Black people? And so I think that's kind of hopefully the solution. This is how we practice the work that we're doing. And thank you guys for this day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, it was good.
Leslie, thank you so much. I hope I realized as I was talking, I was like, oh,
I just want to thank everybody who came, everybody who spoke, everybody who listened. It was very, very informative, stimulating. Where's Jonathan? Electrifying. Thank you, Gloria. Is there anything you'd like to say as we leave? You don't have to. Organize. Organize. Thank you.